important according to me. So let's go about the talk. Mm. So the motivation of distributed analytics is obvious that okay, the because of the big data era, that there are so many large volumes of data being accumulated, and applications, that modern day applications like web applications, web services, they actually are based on the internet. And even the with the coming up of Internet of Things, even devices such as your Raspberry Pis are also generating data. So, data is coming from heterogeneous sources, and data is very large in size. So, to handle such large volume of data, come and the data is coming in at large velocity, that is high arrival rate, and there's a variety of data that is coming from heterogeneous sources. And to handle that, the standalone applications, normal applications that would be used earlier, are not able to handle such data right now. So, like in the back end, people would use relational databases traditionally. Relational databases have a fixed schema, which would basically say that how the data is organized among different tables with different columns, fixed columns, right, and with different primary key and foreign key constraints strictly enforced in the database. So it's basically a fixed, static, well-defined, formal schema definition that was there. But now we are talking about storage systems, which are typically do not follow this well-defined schema and a relational model. But we are talking about things like distributed file systems, like for storing the data with technologies or protocols such as sharding, that is partitioning the data into multiple chunks and storing them in multiple servers. And also, like, kind of dumbed down or relaxed database models such as key value storage systems. And of course, the operations on such storage systems or databases are heavily parallelized. So we are talking about parallel as well as distributed computing here. So, to give you a snapshot, the kind of systems that are there right now, one very common but slightly outdated example is your Hadoop distributed file system, HDFS, which basically is like it stores the data in a cluster of nodes, where there is a master or controller node called name node, which basically allocates the different partitions or blocks among the servers, and also manages replication. And the data nodes are basically your worker nodes or slave nodes, which according to master slave architecture basically stores the actual data or blocks into which the original data is partitioned into, right? And the file system at a high level also manages data coherency, like consistency and parallel operations in the form of map, reduce, API, and whatnot, right? So not going into the depth right now. This is what it looks like. Normal, state of the art distributed analytics systems, right? So it's a cluster. Distributed computing is there. There is replication. Copies of data item are distributed across different servers for redundancy, and also the data is so large that it has to be broken, partitioned into chunks, and the chunks are stored into different servers, data nodes, right? So that's an example of a distributed file system. Now let's go into the philosophy of distributed analytics and what it means and why it's important. So typically we are talking about relational databases in the like couple of decades back, right? That was the only thing that was available to us, relational databases, which followed the very celebrated entity relationship model, where you have to define the well-defined formal model in the form of ER diagrams, right? And there was a support for very well understood and very easy to write queries in the form of this SQL query language, right? And these databases basically satisfied has to satisfy the properties called the ACID properties like atomicity, consistency, isolation, durability, right? Without going into many like the exact details, so this means that okay, the operations in a transaction, database transaction had to be atomic, that is they could not be disintegrated, or could not exist in a disintegrated form. And consistency means that okay, I mean the integrity constraints like primary key, foreign key could not at all be violated. So, and isolation means that for concurrent transactions or concurrent operations, one transaction could not corrupt or change the value to be seen by expected by the other transaction. So isolation for concurrency. And durability means that at the end of the transaction, basically after the commit to the database is done, the data actually persists in the database, right? And there are so many established technologies and I mean products, Oracle, DB2, so on and so forth, at that were there, right? And it is still there, but now we have moved on to a different paradigm, right? So the business world has moved, and there's a paradigm shift where everything is now based on the internet. Not only that, I mean, uh, there's a rise of web applications, everything is web based, and mobile applications have come up. And not only that, things are now connected by via everything is now connected to via network, like your vehicular network, like your mobile network, and your internet of things, which basically means the things from your AC to your light switch to your fan switch to your whatnot basically are connected via a network, so that without using the switch you can actually adaptively control all those things for the better usage of energy and conservation of energy, power, and all those things. So now everything, the funda of computer has actually changed. A computer is no more that, I mean, box or laptop. It's anything. So and so the database and the data analytics paradigm has also got to shift in some sense, right? So what is that all about? So the challenges for existing or traditional database systems that are now there because of this paradigm shift is that okay, the number of concurrent users have like exponentially increased and still increasing, because I mean think of it, right? Everything is based on the internet. So I mean now basically one application that you managed in-house earlier, like maybe people in a particular building could only use, that application cannot now actually theoretically be accessed by the billions of users across the globe. So your application, if it was a kind of dumb coding that would not scale with the number of concurrent threads, your system would crash. Basically, your application would crash. So now you have to think about that. Okay, you are not going to cater just to one or two, three users. I mean, can your system really manage that? Okay, I mean, you are being throttled to the extent that like billions of users are simultaneously trying to do something with your application, on your application, to some insert into the database from some web form or something like that. So that thing, and I mean then availability of services has to be 24 by 7 for the similar reasons, right? And of course we talked about the large amount of data size, and because of the heterogeneous sources the data is coming from, I mean you cannot really enforce a particular structure to the data, because since the data is coming from different sources, you cannot make an assumption that the data will always be in a particular uniform or structured format. The format may change. So we are talking about semi-structured or unstructured data and how they can be handled. And the use cases are also always changing, right? So now this is a buzzword that is going around in the world, that okay, we want NoSQL. So what is NoSQL? I mean, NoSQL is basically the modern generation of databases from Cassandra to HBase to, I mean, anything like Voldemort, all this MemCached-DB. These are all NoSQL storage, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't surprise. I mean, it doesn't support the SQL query. Each and every of these databases always support some form of SQL query. Only thing that is different here is that it is kind of a denormalized database. These all are. Oh, my voice is disconnecting sometime. Okay, I will check that. Okay. Sorry about that. I mean, I don't know what's happening, but yeah. So NoSQL basically means that okay, we do not that those databases do not follow a strict static kind of model, data model, but rather I mean they are denormalized. They do not enforce any strict I mean, what is it called? Integrity constraints or any kind of structure, but rather they are flexible in some manner or other, right? Because of the performance requirement from those systems, right? They have to handle huge concurrency. They have to be always be available and all that. So this is the thing about requirement of NoSQL storage. And scalability wise, okay, the data I mean scaling. I mean data is increasing in an exponential rate, right? That's there. So the in terms of the system's ability to handle or scale well with respect to data size increase has to be there. Read scalability means that with increasing number of concurrent read operations, the system might also be scalable or working well. And similarly with write scalability also, increasing number of concurrent writes. So the system must be scalable, be able to handle increase in each of these things, data, read and write, and still work well. And how does the system actually needs to provide scalability for distributed analytic systems? There is one thing called vertical scalability, which is called scaling up, and horizontal scalability, which means scaling out. So scale up means that okay, you move from single core machines to tetra core, like quadra core machines, to I mean whatnot, like I mean 200 core machines, GPU machines and all that. So you move up in the food chain with respect to the resources of the server. And horizontal scalability means basically you scale out, means that you add more and more number of computers or servers to the system and make it distributed. So both these approaches allows you to handle larger number of users, larger number of threads, larger data size, because you are increasing the resources either in this way or this way, right? Yeah, and typical characteristics of such systems has to be that, okay, I mean, first of all, they must be able to scale out with additional commodity servers, low cost, easily available servers or computers for high performance and availability, right? You cannot always buy very, expensive servers at a large scale, right? You have to make do with commodity servers, okay? And the target is to satisfy the performance, availability requirement and fault tolerance, that okay, one of the nodes fail or a couple of nodes fail, still you have additional nodes that you can add to the system and additional computers that you can add to the system, and it still can provide the desired availability and performance, right? So for doing that, you have to give up the ACID guarantees like the atomicity, consistency, isolation, durability, the standard guarantees, and move to a practice of supporting partitioning, that chunking the data into blocks and replicating or copying each block and maintaining the replication and partitioning across servers. So we are talking about node relational data models, not the ER diagram and all that. rather a flexible, rather dumb kind of model, which allows you to have that enjoy the trade-off in terms of the performance and availability. So different data models is state of UR model that these systems have usually support. One is the very simple and very popular key value model. Next is the document model, and the third is actually the my favorite and the most pragmatic of the models, that is the white column model, and the fourth is the graph database model. So all of these are basically representations or abstractions like your ER model deep, that you are representing the data in a particular uh, using a particular abstraction or representation, which allows you to define how the user or the applications interact with the system in general. Right. So that being said, the first example, the key value stores or the is there any issue? I mean, somebody is unmuted. Can you please mute? Yeah, thank you. So we are talking about key value stores, and the data model supported by those key value stores is very simple. As I said, that basically you have kind of a map, hash map kind of thing, that okay, you have your key, some keys and corresponding values, so that, I mean, uniquely the key actually identifies the corresponding value, and the value can be anything like any uh, a comma separated list of columns, or it can be a single data element, anything. So basically when you create and want to enter a new row into the database, what you do is that you create a new key and you associate the value that you want to store for, or that row that you want to store with that key. So when you want to search the database for a particular data item, you actually search using the key. So key here is like the and primary index for relational databases, exactly how they worked, right? And the values are, what it means is that okay, the keys are unique and can be of arbitrary data type, so it doesn't enforce any data type for the keys and values. And values are opaque to the system means that the system cannot directly access the value. So when the client application actually, or the front end application calls the database, it cannot directly go to the value. It has to go access the value through the key. So that is what it means by values are opaque to the system. And so an example how things would work with a key value store is that okay, normally with a relational database, this is what the table would look like. An user table containing the columns login, name, website, and Twitter. Now the same thing if you want to capture using key value model is that, so you would have to do it like this. So the bottommost picture in the slide. So basically you pick the login column as a key, and so for each value of the login attribute, you are associating the rest of the values or the rest of the columns as a comma separated string, and that gives you the value. So for each row, you assign the login attribute as a key, and the rest of the attributes you append using as a comma separated string, and that and store it as a value corresponding to that key, right? And if there are null entries for certain columns, actually you actually omit those values in the key value model. In the database model, entity relationship model, you had to keep the null values actually as null, but for key value models, you just omit the null entries altogether. So that basically the comma separated string that you are storing in the value becomes kind of flexible in that way, variable in size, right? And if actually there are some redundant values, repetitive values, as you can see here in this uh, in case of this particular column, favorites column, right? It's actually there are some repetitions for the same login ID of the user list12. There are actually two values of favorites, right? So we append those two favorites for list12 into as a comma separated list, and actually put it in the same value column for that particular user. So it's kind of a flexible model, as you can see that you actually are reducing the storage space in different ways, like omitting the null values and actually keeping a restructurable list in some way. And yeah, and as you can see, so please don't mind if the text is kind of jumbled some way, because as I told you, my computer crashed, and so I mean the text might not be in a proper format. So so queries, actual SQL queries for key value stores, what actually they look like, right? So as you know, as you already know, that this key value stores actually are very simplistic model of data. So there is only a very rudimentary set of operations that are supported here: the put, get, and the delete. And what they mean is basically, if you want to insert or update some results or values into a table, what you do is that you use the put operation or put method, where you say what is the key, and then you say what is the value, and just it inserts a new key value pair, right? And similarly, if you want to read a particular row, you just access that row by the corresponding key. Okay, so I mean things like your join queries, like your any kind of value related queries, like nested queries or your conditional select, those things are not actually available for you to implement at the low level, but still you can actually use this a sequence of this select and get queries to form your original complicated SQL query. But you have to use a sequence or a number of get queries and combine them together in some manner in the client application side. So in the system side, in the database side, the sophistication is or abstractions are very limited. So the headache or the overhead is actually on the application developer side, that how the application developer actually uses the system. So there is a trade-off between relational databases and these kind of systems, that relational databases are rather easy to use because they provide a lot of abstractions, lot of sophisticated query forms, sort of lot of keywords that you can use. I mean that makes life easier for the application developer. But I mean, if you talk about the application development, one second. Hello. Really? Oh, I mean, oh, okay. I don't know what to do about that. Okay, okay. Let me try something. Let me try to connect it via LAN then. Okay, might be better. So, okay. Just one moment. I can see that the internet is behaving a little bit badly. Try to connect via LAN. I don't know if LAN is available. Okay, so I checked. I cannot do anything because LAN is not available here in this meeting room. So I don't have any choice but to continue actually. So sorry about the connection. I mean, I'm in the institute, but something weird is happening today. So hopefully you can see the slides. Okay. So I'm back to the lecture. Yeah. So what I was saying. Okay. Fine. Right. So the limitations with this kind of NoSQL storage systems, as I was saying, is that okay, the application developer has to do a lot of things because the sophisticated abstractions and keywords are not really available here. But so what is available here is that those kind of sophistications or internal protocols which allow for horizontal partitioning, which is called sharding, that is breaking up the data into smaller components and storing them across different servers and maintaining the partitions actually, so that you can handle very large data which typically could not be stored in a single machine across distributed computers, and which makes things very efficient and actually practically feasible. But if you wanted to make things even more efficient, how would you do that? I mean, so we can see that previously. So if you had null entries, you just omitted that entry, right? So then application developers' task would be a little bit more challenging because there is no unified format here. Because like for some values, some rows, the value has 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, three commas, right? And for another row it has two commas, and the third row it has only no commas, right? So when parsing the database and trying to do run some read or write command, it's actually application has to handle all those different variations with respect to number of commas. Whereas is there a simplistic solution where you just you just keep a placeholder value for null attributes, that is empty list. The notation for an empty symbol for an empty list, you just enter that, okay? Or in some cases, if there's a null value, you just keep blank entries, so that uniformly all rows or all values have the same number of commas, and so parsing them becomes an uniform job basically. So use cases of this kind of simplistic key value stores is like, okay, you could, of course, you could do limited number of things with these abstractions, but you could still store the web session information, profiles, configurations, e-commerce applications like shopping cart, etc. Okay. So most of the simplistic queries you could actually implement using this very well, and that's how typically this is used. And the model is implemented in different actual open source databases, and all these are actually available to you in the Apache or otherwise Basho and other websites. And these databases are, for example, a memcached-db, your Redis, Voldemort, Riak. All of these are very popular and well used in the industry, and you can actually play around with this. These are very easy to use, and there is no learning curve as such for using them. And they all support either support SQL queries, or they actually use REST APIs. So HTTP, if you know HTTP command and REST and the REST API or the SOAP protocol, you actually can use them very well. So the next data model that I want to talk about is a document model. So the philosophy is, okay, I mean, you want to represent or organize your data in the database in the same way that you organize documents in a library or in your in any institution, right? So, and not only that, this document model actually follows directly from the document object model in JavaScript and HTML. So in HTML you have different tags and different values associated with these tags, right? And the document object model basically allows you to structure each component in an HTML page in a hierarchical fashion. And the JavaScript, any JavaScript based commands, uh, utilities or languages can actually process those HTML files using this document based hierarchy, where it's basically simplistic that every document object has a name and a value. So document object name and value. So name value pairs are there. Similarly, in a document model, you have a set of name and value pairs. Okay. So each field each field or data item has a unique name and a set of values. Right. The values can be anything, any scalar value or lists, just like before in key value stores. And this is how it would look like. Okay, so you have the name, and then you write colon, sorry, and then you give the value. Okay, so I mean, in this way you can actually combine a number of tables together into a common place, where you keep all the name value pairs in a single document, and basically if you have redundant values, you just keep them as lists corresponding to that particular column, exactly as your key value stores some way. Okay, and you can have nestings. Okay, nestings of documents in a hierarchical fashion also, where some pairs of name value pairs are actually nested within a particular value. Okay, for example, look at this address field, right? So this address field is actually a nested field, where it is comprised of another field, two fields, street and city. Okay, so each of them has their own name value pairs. So basically, a database is organized into multiple documents, and each document has its own name value pairs, collection of name value pairs. And there is no fixed schema, fixed structure, fixed number of fields in each document. So it's kind of, and each document has a unique identifier, document ID, which is generated by the system, right? So this is how it typically would look like. Okay, so you can have you can define certain documents, and you can define some collections of documents actually. Okay, collections of documents, where this collection actually is comprised of is an aggregate of multiple documents, like you see here. And the way that you denote it as a collection is that you put the collection keyword preceding the actual document name, right? And right, and then a document store is also partitioned and replicated. So each document is, again, when storing the document, you actually are partitioning them based on the document ID or on the collection, defined collection, right? And you can actually define secondary indexing just like you do in relational databases for faster access. Okay, and where the secondary index is defined over individual fields in the document, so that you can directly access those fields very well, very fast. And of course, querying them is using JavaScript based APIs. You can actually query them run queries on top of this document stores. Since they follow the document object model, you can run any kind of JavaScript based languages or scripting languages that follow the document object model, right? Just like for MongoDB, which is an example of a document store, uses JSON as a format to represent the data, and it actually uses JSON APIs to run different queries on top of those data, right? So these are some examples of JSON-based calls, right? Where, yeah, where basically you if you want to search some person with a name Alice in your users database, you just say db.users.find, which basically means that find me the person with name of Alice, Alice in the users document in this particular database, right? So this is kind of very self-explanatory in some sense, and there are several sophistications that are available here, but let's not dwell on them. So the use case of document stores is pretty simplistic, that whenever you have some kind of a document based system, like your blogging platform, like your content management system, like your event logging system, whatever, right? Whatever you can directly map to a document object, document store, you can actually use them, right? So examples of document stores are MongoDB, CouchDB, right? Amazon SimpleDB. Of this, MongoDB and Couchbase are open source and pretty much popular. MongoDB is the most popular one. It's fairly easy to use. You can try it out. And next comes my favorite and most practical of all these data models, the white column model, which is kind of a derivative from the key value model, but a little bit more sophisticated in some sense. So this white column stores kind of reflect or closely, I mean, have close similarity with a key value store and actually an entity relationship model as well, because underlying in the underlying system, the data is actually represented as rows and columns, just like your tables are done in relational databases. But only difference is that for relational database, the number and the type of the columns is fixed for every table. So, but here the number of columns is not fixed, the type of columns is not fixed, it is actually flexible. So you can initially define that your table has 3 columns, but then after some number of times you can actually, that same table you can define to have 4 or 5 columns without modifying the metadata. If you had to change the table format in your database with ER data, with ER model, with relational database, you have to run a DDL command, which would basically change the metadata altogether. But here you don't need to do that kind of things, but it's already the definition of the column families here are actually flexible in the sense that it allows you to run on the runtime while running the queries, actual queries, you can add new columns dynamically. Okay, so it's schema free in that sense, that every row has a unique row key, and the rest of the columns are flexible every sense. Okay, so it looks like a key value store with a unique row key, only you have multiple columns here instead of a single value. So it's extensible, schema free, and potentially sparse. So sparse means that, okay, you can see that, I mean, in some rows, there are lesser number of columns supported here, and you do not have to forcibly place a null value and create a new keep that column anyway and maintain that column anyway for those rows, right? You are having 4 columns in the first row, second row you just have 2 columns, and that's it, right? So this is a sparse matrix. It's kind of minimizes the amount of storage required. And this is similar to the document model without the nesting, because I mean you have your column, you have your name value pairs, like your column value pairs, but you are not doing any nesting here of column values. This is how truly an equivalent a relational database table would look like in implemented in white column format. Okay, so you can see with the sparse definition of the table of the column store, it actually is minimizing a lot of storage space, and thus being able to handle very large data. And not only that, it's kind of being able to handle heterogeneous data sources by adding a lot of flexibility in terms of the design. Right. So technically, with Tamil, in terms of terminology, the tables or the rows in the table are actually organized in the form of uh, column families. Okay. So each group of columns are actually organized in terms of column families, which allows for flexible number of columns within the column family itself. So once you define the column family associated with a particular row key, you don't need to fix the size, number of columns, or specify the columns within the column family. The columns can actually be added or created in the runtime, in the query time. All you do during defining the column store is actually you just define the column family. Okay. And yeah, so you have a row key, you have column family definitions, you have column key definitions, and within the column family there can be multiple column key and multiple column values. Right? So you can see that there are two column families, Alice, 12, Bobbin, Charlie. These are actually the first column is actually the row key, and you have two column families defined here, the basic user data and the favorites. So favorites and basic user data are column families, and within that there can be multiple column keys and column values in a flexible manner. And internally again the data is partitioned based on the row keys. The data is chunked and all that. And there is also vertical partitioning. Vertical partitioning means that within the column families also there can be partitioning, not just in terms of row keys, that the whole row is actually partitioned, but also individually the column families can also be partitioned. Okay. And secondary indices are again can be created based on arbitrary columns, because you have your columns keys and column values. So each column key can be actually be made a secondary index very easily. Right. So here there is a little bit of sophistication available in contrast with your key value store, so that the application developer has lesser challenge here, but still, the application developer for handling the flexible column families have to have some kind of coding overhead on the application side to maintain correctness of operations and consistency of operations. So use cases where are white column stores used? Everywhere actually. For all kind of data analytics, web-based data analytics applications, reporting tools, personalized search applications, all these things. And examples are, there are more number of, majority of examples of distributed store systems or NoSQL stores are actually in this genre. So Hadoop HBase is a popular one. Apache Cassandra is very popular. Google's Bigtable, which is not open source but is very popular anyway. Amazon had its SimpleDB and DynamoDB, which are again not open source. So you can look at Apache Cassandra or Hadoop HBase, any of them. I mean, they are open source, freely available, and I mean, if you just follow the startup getting started guide, you can actually very quickly set up a distributed NoSQL store for distributed analytics using Cassandra or HBase. And Cassandra actually supports its own SQL query, which is called cQuery, not SQL, but SQL, which is Cassandra query language, which is basically exactly in the same format as SQL, only there's some minor differences at the syntax level, which you will very well understand. Okay. And for HBase also there is, I mean, you can it supports the SQL queries, and on top of HBase you can run something called Hive, which is a business intelligence engine which supports Hive queries, which are basically called SparkQuery language, which follows the SparkQuery language, which is again a variant of the SQL language, quite similar. Finally, the graph databases. So, I mean, not just you just till now you saw that okay, the databases that we saw were either key value stores or white column value stores or document stores. But I mean, one obvious model that you can think of is that okay, graph model, that where I mean you can think of any application or any client performing a sequence of queries or sequence of tasks which can be represented as a graph. So this graph database system, it inherently represents uh, or models everything in a form of graph with different vertices and labeled edges. Okay, so it is actually, the philosophy came from something called property graph. So property graph was a kind of graph model used for user interface defining, actually, for software engineering, where basically you could define different components of a software system using different vertices, and the interaction between different vertices or different components were identified using edges, and the labels in the edges were defined the properties of these interactions. Okay, and the properties were given in form of name value pairs within the labels, right? So following that, the graph database system came into play, and it actually in terms of interface and implementation, there are several, I mean, hardcore graph based implementations or methods available here. It has a very sophisticated and wide support for things like pattern matching, traversal kind of queries like shortest path, etc. And other kind of queries like search queries like PageRank and connected components, coloring problem, clustering, all those things are available here, which makes it a perfect candidate for any kind of machine learning tasks like pattern recognition, pattern matching, document search, all those things. So use cases can be anything from complex networks like social networking, analyzing social network data, which the social network can be viewed as a graph, right? Information networks, technological,
Map.
and concrete examples can be anything from location, GPS based services, tracking services, recommendation engines, fake detection, all those things, right? And examples can be Neo4j, which is I think an Apache project, and But Giraffe is the most popular. It's not mentioned here, but Giraffe is the most popular and most famous open source implementation of a graph database. You should definitely look at that. Uh, Neo4j is a good example as well, of course. Right. Yeah, so to summarize, I mean, till now what we saw is that, okay, uh, in terms of distributed analytics, the underlying data, how it has to be modeled, is changed. We cannot follow the strict uh, entity relationship model of relational databases, but rather we have different options in the form of key value model, white column model, document model, graph database model. All of this kind of denormalizes or foregoes of the normalization requirement of a database, traditional database, and doesn't follow the acid properties of atomicity, consistency, isolation, durability. And but not just these models, there are also databases which are kind of multi-model stores, which I mean takes in or absorbs or mixes the good things from different models. Like Cosmos DB is probably the most popular one. It's actually a mix of key value model, all the four data models that we saw: key value, document model, white column model, and graph. And opportunistically, it allows you to apply any of those data models on your system. And yeah, so right. So we are talking about, we have talked about NoSQL systems which support non-relational models, right? There is no fixed schema, and it can support semi-structured and unstructured data, because with, for example, with white column stores, the using column families, you can actually forego of the structural fixities, and actually dynamically on the runtime you can say that, okay, what is actually the composition of the column family in terms of how many column keys are there, right? And but the query capabilities are inherently less, because it doesn't support sophisticated abstractions such as joins and other kind of keywords like in, exist, all those things like relational database. So the headache is more on the overhead is more on the application developer side, who has to do a lot of coding, give a lot of coding effort to implement those kind of sophisticated queries. And it provides, these systems provide horizontal scalability, where vertices, where machines or servers can be added anytime to the system to provide high performance, all availability at all times, despite partitioning, despite inavailability or fault or crash of some servers. And this is achieved by internally by partitioning of the data, where the data is actually chunked or divided into blocks and stored in separate servers, and also data is copied or replicated. Okay, so the consistency requirements or guarantees of the data is actually foregone here, and there are some relaxed consistency guarantees that are there. So yeah, so this is again repeating. So we have given up the acid guarantees, and we are talking about uh, some flexible guarantees, consistency guarantees. What are those? So the theoretically, now going into a little bit of theoretical background. So we have said that, okay, these databases or these systems, distributed systems, do not provide acid properties, acid guarantees, because they want to provide higher performance and scalability with very large data and all that, right? So then, what is the guarantee that they provide? It's called sometimes it's called the base guarantees. That is, the acronym is base, so it says that basically available, soft state, eventually consistent. These are the guarantees that must be provided by any distributed system. So basically available means that when the system must be always be available. That is, if you think of yourself as a user, so in any time, in no times, it should happen that you are running some applications, and you are actually trying to do something on the system, but since the underlying system, distributed database or distributed system is down, you are not you are getting a 404 error or some other error. So the system unavailable error should never come. Should be basically available always. Soft state means that okay, the distributed data, the data being manipulated by the distributed system doesn't need to be consistent or coherent state at all time. That means I mean it doesn't mean that, it means that okay, concurrently maybe you are performing some updates on a common data item, on the same data item, and this data item is replicated across multiple servers. There are multiple copies of the data item in multiple servers. So there is server 1, 2 and 3, and server 1, 2 and 3 has the same have different copies of the same data item A. Now you change the value one replica or at one server, you change the value of A to B. So now two servers have the value A for the same data item, and for one server it is B. So it means that okay, if you subsequently you do some kind of run some read command on the same data, it means that it should not be like that, that instantaneously in a flash of an eye, in blink of an eye, the updates happening in any part of the system must always be available or visible to other portions or other servers. So it says that eventually, I mean, so this consistency of the system does not need to be there all the time. So the system must be eventually consistent. That is, eventually an update will be propagated to all the servers in the system without any partition happening in between, without any failure happening in between. So these base properties are suitable only for those applications which can tolerate some inconsistency, right? It cannot be applied for system critical systems like banking systems, core banking systems, so you cannot say that okay, concurrently all my family members are trying to access my savings account, and I have 1,50,000 in my account, and I am withdrawing all those 1,50,000 at one instant because maybe I have to pay some medical bills. Now my account balance is zero, but concurrently, just right after that, after a fraction of a second, my father also tries to access the account. He doesn't know that I have taken in 1,50,000 and there is no money, but she still tries to withdraw 500 rupees for buying groceries. But then it should not allow, the system should not allow him to withdraw that 500 rupees, because then my bank balance will be negative, minus 500, and then I will have to pay some overdraft charges, right? So these kind of systems are not the proper use case, but any e-commerce system, any bidding system, any distributed system which is not mission critical is actually suitable. Like Facebook, like any social networking system. So another very important concept here which cannot be overlooked is the CAP theorem. So Eric Brewer proposed this theorem, and it was proved later by Gilbert, Nancy and Lynch later on in the 80s, I think, if I am not wrong. So this theorem which is a building block of any distributed analytics or distributed systems class, it says that okay, you have these three properties: consistency, availability and partition tolerance. So what does it mean? So consistency means that the same copy, identical value of a replicated data item, okay, must be visible from all nodes. Okay, so that means that okay, you are looking at a replicated system where for each data item or for each object, you are keeping multiple copies, multiple replicas. Okay, now it says that okay, all these replicas must have the same value at all time. This is what typically consistency means like. Okay, in case of at least in case of distributed systems. Okay, now availability means that okay, if you are performing some requests, running some queries on a system, then this request must be answered by the system. The system should not say that the system is unavailable or down or something like that. So if you ask a question to the system, that question must be answered. Okay. And partition tolerance means that okay, the system must continue to operate or perform even when the system is actually partitioned into two set of disjoint nodes. That is, if you think of the cluster as a connected graph, then you are actually with a partition. That means there is some internet network failure. Then basically your graph is broken down into two disconnected components. It says that even if this kind of partitioning happens in the network, it should actually the system should still be able to operate. And CAP theory says that these three properties, CAP, consistency, availability, partition tolerance, cannot be simultaneously guaranteed all at the same time by a distributed system with data replication and frequent partitions. So it says that any two of these three properties can be guaranteed by any distributed, practically possible distributed system. So the way this is represented is that okay, you draw a Venn diagram with CAP properties as three spheres, three circles in the Venn diagram, three entities in the Venn diagram, and you try to say that okay, the common area in the common area between which is common to both C, A, and P, in that region, no database can actually be there. There can be no database which actually implements an intersection of C, A, and P properties. So if you want to have a practical database, then it can be there in each of these intersection points, between the intersection point of C and P only, C and A only, A and P only, so on. Okay, so the base systems, the distributed systems that we were talking about, which provided basically available soft state eventual consistency, actually are the systems that work in this area. That means they provide a trade-off between A and P, and they compromise completely on C. Not completely, but mostly on C. Okay. So in terms of consistency of data, there is some ambiguity that needs to be cleared at the end of the story. So by consistency, we usually knew that consistency means the consistency property in acid, atomicity, consistency, right? Isolation. But with distributed systems, this is not the case. The consistency for distributed systems is not the same thing as consistency for acid systems. That is, for an acid system, the consistency actually means integrity, like the primary key constraints, the foreign key constraints, or the unique constraints. So any constraints imposed on the relational database, which says which imposes restrictions on how the values of different columns in a table can actually be changed, right? Whereas in case of distributed systems, consistency actually means imposes some restrictions on the ordering of operations in the system by the system. That means it says that okay, if there is an update query or an insert query, after that there is a select query, for example, right? There is some write, following that there is some reads. It means that this if the read must always return the latest result of the latest write preceding it. So if there is W1, W2, two writes happening, after that there is a read R1. So R1 should return the result of R2, not R1, according to strong consistency. That means the consistency basically specifies what is the level in which the latest result or how does the subsequent queries view the results or updates on the particular system. Right? So for strong consistency, it says that the latest result or the result of the latest write must be always, or the latest query must be visible to a current query. So, but this is something that cannot be achieved actually without sacrificing on the availability and partition tolerance part. Okay? So, but if we forego of the real time requirement with this story, that means we want the following queries to always return the latest result at some point of time. Okay, that is, a particular query must be able to view the results of the latest or for preceding queries, then but not at instantaneously, not right after the previous query finishes. Then we can actually implement this without with a weekly without a strong coordination among the replicas, without sacrificing availability and partition tolerance that much, right? And weak consistency, it actually means that we do not actually enforce any guarantee that the subsequent queries will return the latest update. Okay, there is no guarantee like that. And eventually consistency means that it's a kind of a liveness property. If you know what liveness means, that if no intermediate updates are happening, then the result of a particular update must reach the must be visible or must take effect in the system eventually. That is, that all accesses will return the last updated value if there is no intermediate update between the last update and this current access. And there is an upper bound on this inconsistency window, that is the window in which all replicas are actually updated in a lazy manner, in an asynchronous manner, using what is called write back policy, which is the same as for caching principles, right? So, but the thing is that between the strong consistency and the weakest one, the eventual consistency, there are actually a host of different specific consistency models that are there. There are formal consistency models like causal consistency, uh, like your monotonic write consistency, like your monotonic read, like your radio write. All these are different consistency models defined according to the semantics of how the orders, what is the ordering of the operations in a particular system. And distributed systems and NoSQL stores that we talked about actually enforces this consistency models in an indirect fashion. That means that let's consider that a replicated storage system or replicated distributed system has n number of replica nodes. That is, there are n number of servers which store copies of the same object. And R and W are actually the number of servers that need to acknowledge for a successful read operation or a successful write operation. That means if you issue a read or write operation, then at least R or W number of servers must actually return an acknowledgement for that read or write, to be successful. Now CAP theorem requires that, okay, W must be equal to 9, equal to n. That is, for all the n replicas must acknowledge for a successful write to happen. That is for strong consistency. Okay, but for weaker forms of consistency, it actually says that only the summation of R and W must be greater than n. That is, the sum of the nodes, sum of the number of nodes required to acknowledge for a successful read and write, the combination of them must be greater than the number of replicas, which is called the majority quorum condition, which says that a majority of the number of replicas must acknowledge. And for eventual consistency, since it's the weakest model, it just says that R plus W can be anything less than equal to N. It can be any value. Any number of nodes can reply, acknowledge, upper bounded by the number of total replicas, and that is enough for eventual consistency. Okay. And right. But for fault tolerance or availability, you must have W equal to 1, that is at least one number of right nodes must acknowledge to you. So with that, I want to end the lecture here, and I think it's better to ask, listen to any questions that you have at this point. So if you have any questions, this is actually the time. Do you have any questions? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, sir. Listening, sir.
Yes. Yes, please. Tell me. No, I have ended the lecture actually. I want you to ask any questions. If you have any questions, you can ask me. Or doubts. Okay, if you don't have any doubts, okay, I can at least tell you some kind of pointers. So, for example, So, for example, the thing that you should go back and do is try two things. One is, now in the current COVID situation, of course, you cannot do distributed analytics in labs. So you can actually look at Amazon and Google Cloud platform, Amazon Web Service and Google Cloud, and you can actually create an account in Amazon AWS Web Service or in Google Cloud platform, and you can actually spawn or create virtual machines in those systems and create a cluster, distributed cluster. And you can actually run experiments, by distributed analytics experiments, by downloading anything like those open source projects like Apache Hadoop, Apache Spark, or Apache Cassandra, and create a distributed cluster of Apache Spark or Apache Cassandra, and run SQL queries or even create a new web application or analytics application. And there are actually, if you go to the Apache Hadoop or Apache Spark website, you will actually find a lot of resources, lot of examples which you can try out very easily to run machine learning applications. Like, I will just give the name Apache Spark. You can actually use this one. So if you go to the Apache Spark website, you will actually see a lot of examples in the examples tab, and you can try those ML applications. So machine learning in Apache Spark is just like writing 2-3 lines of codes, because it's a very sophisticated and good support for machine learning. So you can run develop analytics application very fast in a very quick manner there, and you can try this out. Okay, so that's what I would suggest. So if you don't have any questions, I think I can stop here. Thank you.
Yes, participants, do you have any queries? No? Queries from audience? Oh. Okay. So, thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was a nice session, very informative.
My pleasure.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Best of luck for the rest of this program.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Bye.
So, participants, we will start the next session at 12 o'clock. Next session will be starting from 12 o'clock. Start 12 o'clock. All of you are requested to join before 5 minutes the meeting. I think the meeting link will be the same. And after the second session, I will share the attendance link for the forenoon session. Okay? Okay. So the same link will be there. I will share in the group. Hello?